Business Insider hired me to film a cinematic interview in a house I'd never seen before with no additional crew. In this video, I'll walk you through the exact process that I used to get the job done, from figuring out the interview location once I entered the apartment, to building out the set, to selecting gear, to managing video, audio, and patching in a remote producer from across the world. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Austin Meyer. I'm a documentary filmmaker, National Geographic Explorer, and on this channel I share the field-tested skills, mindsets, and lessons that have helped me on my journey as a documentary filmmaker. As a documentary filmmaker or video journalist, you don't always get to scout out your location ahead of time. The vast majority of time, you show up to wherever the story takes you and you deal with it. You improvise. The mindset that you have to have is that no matter what is thrown at you, you are going to make the best out of what's available to you. That was my mindset going into this shoot for Business Insider, and here is how everything went down. A few days before the shoot, a producer at Business Insider contacted me. They wanted to hire a DP who owned their own equipment and who could build out a full interview set, film, manage audio, and also zoom in a remote producer to conduct the interview. I said yes. Ahead of the shoot day, Insider provided me with some sample frames for how they wanted the interview to look. So let's take a quick look at the frames that they sent me, and we're gonna walk through them, and I'll share what I took away from those reference images. So I actually got reference videos on this project because what I was filming was the second in a series, and Business Insider had already filmed and published the first in that series, which they then sent to me to study. So when I got the video, I really looked carefully at how these interviews were set up. So here is a little clip so you can tell we have the wide angle, we have a tight angle. It's a 2-camera interview shoot. So again, tight and then back to the wide here. And so let's go through a couple of things that I noticed and appreciated and thought about taking into my shoot. So first off, I'm not sure who the DP on this shoot was, but I want to give a shout out and compliments to them because they did a really nice job with this interview setup. The first thing that I notice is that the light on our subject's face is really soft and looks really natural. So the DP did a great job lighting this interview. And the reason it looks so natural is because we have these big bright windows here in the background, and it does feel as though the light is streaming through these windows and hitting our subject, and that it does not feel like we have this huge source, that there's a light in the room just like beaming down on him. Although probably there's a big key light with a big softbox just out of frame right here. So shout out to the DP for motivating that light from these background windows. The next thing I'm looking at on this wide angle is just how everything is framed. So we have a pretty traditional documentary setup where our subject's face is on that left third of the frame and the upper third. So we're on one of those kind of crosshairs of the rule of thirds, pretty classic. And then our participant is looking off screen to an interviewer. Also classic, as you'll see, we're shooting from the shadow side towards the key light. Another thing I noticed here is that does not seem to be a hair light. I'm not sure why the DP made that decision, but in this case, a hair light I think is not totally necessary, because for me, a hair light is really used to separate our participant from the background. And here we have dark hair set against a pretty white or gray backdrop. So it doesn't need that much separation for me. I think this looks very natural, and I think the DP did a nice job. The other thing that I will note about this wide frame is that it is a pretty dramatic angle from which we are shooting. We are shooting looking up at our subject. The camera is not level with our subject's eye level. And so that is just something that I noted here. And when an outlet sends you a reference image, you don't always know what about it they like or what about it they don't like. So it really helps to ask your director or a publication, hey, I noticed this about the interview. Is that something you like, or is that something that's flexible? So I'll always ask questions if I have them, like on this one, asking, okay, do we want to shoot it looking up like that? Because that's very much a look. And so we go from the wide to now the tight. Now the tight is a very interesting one. The tight has a lot of differences compared to the wide. A lot of strong stylistic decisions. So on the tight shot, the way the subject is framed, this is called short-sighted compared to long-sighted. So long-sighted is essentially the direction in which our participant is looking is much larger than the space behind our participant. So this is long-sighted, and then this is short-sighted, where the space in front of our participant is actually shorter than the space behind our participant. And that is unconventional in the documentary interview setup. The other thing that I note here is that whereas our wide shot is looking up at our participant, now the tight shot actually is looking down at our participant from an angle. Again, an interesting stylistic decision. And the last thing that I noticed is just kind of the overall look is feeling very clean. In this interview context, it almost feels sterile. It almost feels like we're in this kind of sterile conference room. And yet there is a book right here. So it's like a clean look, but it's also hinting that it's casual enough that this person has a book on the table that wasn't removed, which makes it feel like he's in context of like his work day. Maybe he was reading before we got here, even though we know that's not true. But that book is something that I also noticed. Okay, let's move on. Once I looked at those reference images, a couple days passed, and then it was go time. Lugging everything up to the third floor. This is why I hate bringing a lot of gear. As we get into the apartment where we will build the interview set, I'm now going to transition this video into a little picture-in-picture so I can walk you through all the decisions I was making and why. Unfortunately, I can't have a BTS camera operator on these shoots, so the best I can do is record my own BTS and then record this commentary after the fact to bring you into my decision-making process. Entering a space that you've never seen before and figuring out on the fly, under time pressure, where to set up an interview, it can feel like a lot of pressure, but I want you hopefully to embrace it as an exciting challenge of making the best out of what's available to you. The first thing that I think about when I'm entering a space is definitely story. Is there any clear location within a home, within an apartment, within wherever the location is, that ties directly to the story you're trying to tell? That is the first priority. The second priority will then, for me, be the visual quality, the visual aesthetic of the space. So if there's a location that I'm stepping into, if there's a particular room within a home that is directly linked to the story that I want to tell, I'm always going to opt for that if it's extremely important, rather than choose something that's more visually appealing as an interview set, but that has no connection to the story. So those are kind of a couple things that are first in mind when I'm entering a space. Now here we are in the apartment that I stepped into, and there were two main spaces where we could do this interview. So here, what you're looking at is the living room, and then I'm just kind of reviewing the space before I bring in all the gear and everything like that. So we kind of have two different angles. We could shoot from this angle where we're kind of facing towards the windows, or we could go kind of back to this angle where we're kind of shooting maybe into this corner over here and using kind of the couch and this whole living room backdrop as the interview backdrop. We could do that. Or if we come through to the other side of the house, then we get over to a little workstation, little desk for the person we're going to be talking to. Now, something that's important to note here is that this interview was being conducted with someone who is an expert in their field, and so we are going to be talking about their work. So here we have an interview set where the argument for it, if we're going to choose this as our set, is, hey, we're talking to someone about their work. Let's film them where they work and where they are comfortable and in a headspace where they're often going to be thinking about that work. This could be a very natural, comfortable setting to speak to that person in. But if we're going to continue kind of through the space, looking back into the living room, this one, the argument for this space is the visual quality and the amount of options we have for a backdrop, for set decoration, And we have a lot more depth here. Potentially, we could have someone sit here and have the windows way far back, or have someone sit here and have this kind of corner way far back, and giving us a lot of options for that set decoration, and that depth makes things look very cinematic. So here we have one that's a little bit more tied to story, and then we have one that's a little bit more visually interesting. Now, I just said that I will always lean and give the edge to story. However, in this case, the things that we were talking about don't really visually reveal themselves in this desk space. So what I would really be leaning into if I chose this space would be the comfort level of the participant. Now, based on my interactions with this participant who was going to be getting filmed when I entered the space, it seemed like he was pretty comfortable, pretty confident. It wasn't going to matter to him whether we were sitting in this comfort space where he talks about work or whether we were going to be in the living room. I was using my intuition that wasn't going to matter. And, we're not talking about football over here. There's nothing like super visually tying this desk spot to his work. So in this instance, I didn't feel like the interview location was directly linked enough to the content of the story to turn away from the visual potential of the living room. And so that is why I chose to do the interview in the living room. Now, once I choose that I was going to use the windows as a backdrop, there are a couple options for where to sit the participant and how to use those windows as my backdrop. For example, I could have my participant sitting here with these windows in the background and kind of be filming from over here. Or I could do something a little bit different and have my participant maybe this way, filming this way, and kind of use this as the backdrop. Now, the best way to figure out what's right for you and your set, I just like to take my camera and just start moving around the space. Maybe I set it on a tripod and I actually go sit in or crouch in and see what looks nicer. And in this instance, I decided to shoot this way, have my participant right there, and kind of use this as the corner so that we have this corner of the home, so it does feel like we still are in kind of a cozy home-like environment. I wanted something that felt like home rather than just a big window set. I could use this table, which has photos from this person's family, to make it feel a little bit more intimate, because we don't want to extract all the personality out of this home environment. So once I've decided on the direction on which I'm going to shoot, then I start getting my hands on the furniture and building out the interview location exactly the way that I want it to look. Now, you'll see me here in this clip. I am moving this table away from the wall. Any space that I'm coming into, if I'm going to be building that interview set, I'm going to want to get that furniture or the place that the individual is sitting as far away from the wall as possible, because that's going to give us as much depth as possible. And depth is something that's so important, because then you can get that separation, that nice blurry background that makes something feel cinematic and isolates our subject in the space. So here I am just kind of getting the table into a possible location. And as a solo shooter, I'm constantly moving back and forth between camera and, sitting in front of camera. So here I am. I've positioned the table. I'm probably still trying out some focal lengths of lens, maybe a 50 millimeter prime, maybe a 24-70. And here, as I sit in front of the camera, what I'm really looking for is, where does the light naturally strike my face? As I talked about in the reference images, we want to motivate light based on what is in the space. What are the natural lights in the space? The natural lights here being, the sunlight coming through the window. So what I'm looking at as I sit in is, where am I going to put my external lights to make it feel like it's natural light coming through the window? So what I'm looking at here and I'm pointing to is here, right there on my face, is where the light is naturally hitting if I sit in this spot. So I know that is where I should kind of place my key light to really kind of accentuate that on my face. The other thing that you'll see here is maybe where that hair light would be. A hair light, the light from this back window is hitting me right here. So unlike the previous reference frame that we looked at, which didn't have a hair light, this one would make sense to have a hair light because we naturally are seeing light stream in through this back window and giving me a hair light. So once I've studied how the light is actually hitting me in the frame, from there, that is when I start to bring in my lights and build the set. The key light that I used on this project was the Aperture 600D. So here you see me setting it up with the big light dome. And the 600D is the one that I really like that light. It's a key light I use often. And it does give quite a bit of power to help you overpower or balance the sunlight that's coming in from outside. So here I am setting it up in that kind of 45-degree angle from the interview participant. Again, just kind of mimicking where that light would be coming in based on where I was sitting before. And here you go. I'm now setting up the hair light. And the hair light that I'm using is Light Panel. This is the Light Panel Gemini 1x1. And I'll put a link in the description to all this kind of equipment in case you're interested. So here you see me sitting in again to see how the frame is shaping up, see how the light is hitting. So here's when I've put that key light in, and here was before the key light and the hair light. So again, like this. Now you'll see before I put the lighting in, this whole side of my face is in shadow. I'm not getting any sunlight through these windows. That would be a little bit dramatic for the type of interview that I was going to be doing. So I did kind of bring my key light a little bit around so I get a little bit of that wrap where a light is touching this other side of my face. So you can kind of see it there. Here we go. I'm sitting in, trying to figure out the right position. So you see here, as I'm sitting in, something bothers me up here. You know, I'm looking at this dresser behind myself, these photos, this plant coming out of my head and starting to think, okay, can I move that? Because I'm starting to find the frame, but now I'm thinking about everything else behind me as well. How am I going to decorate and make that look nice? Right here, I'm putting my hand out to try to signal to myself right now doing this commentary. This side looks a little bare. Is there something we can put in to kind of balance out the image? There's something that we can put set decoration wise, maybe in that side of the frame to add a little flair, add a little set decoration. So what did I try? I tried a lamp, tried bringing in a lamp. Okay. And now here we go. We've kind of zoomed forward a little bit and we're starting to really see the whole set coming together. So we have our key light, which again is the Aperture 600D. We have the Gemini light panels here, and we have our boom mic. We have the A cam, which is the Sony FX6, and my B cam, which is going to be the Sony A7S III, and things are starting to come together. Here what we see is now we have moved the dresser from this corner just at a frame over here. I've brought in a little plant, again, to just add a little pop. And I've put this honeycomb grid on the key light to make sure that there's not a ton of spill out into the room. But I unlatched the Velcro from the bottom of the key light so that we do get a little spill onto this table. That was just something that I was noticing while I was setting up. At this point, I am starting to get the computer set for a remote interview, zooming in the producer. Now, this is something that's become much more common since COVID, is producers around the world, directors around the world, hiring a DP to come in and film, and they conduct the interview from wherever they are. So one thing that I'm working on here is I am getting my laptop in position for the interview. And I was trying, unlike the reference frame, this is one of the places where I really deviated, is I did try to get the computer at about the eye level of the camera and our interview participant. We do have him looking up just a tad, as you'll see in a minute, but I did try to get that computer at the level of the camera. And this is something that I've been asked to do a bunch recently, zooming in producers from afar, either using my cell phone or the laptop. And you also see our interview participant has now sat in. Oftentimes when I'm about 15 minutes away from go time, I'll ask my participant, hey, if you could sit in, you can just continue being on your phone or doing work. But that helps me get a sense of how tall the person is. Where do I need to set up the cameras? How are our focuses set? And all the fine adjustments before it's go time. One of those final adjustments that I make sure to do is set the white balance. So before we get the table all cleared off, I give them a little white balance card, get my camera nice and close to it, and then I take custom white balance readings on both my Sony FX6 and my Sony a7S III. I call the producer in, who now is on Zoom. I believe she was in London, and they do their final prep before the interview. And after all that, here is our final frame. This is the A-cam. As you can see, we're about at eye level. You can see all the set decoration, how everything came together, and how we're using the windows as a nice backdrop as we can kind of see into the city behind him. But we're also not losing that personal touch. We have these kind of photos, this little altar, presumably of someone from his family. We have a nice little balance in our frame of using this lamp and using this plant to balance out the frame with our interview participant here, using that rule of thirds with his eye, again, on that kind of crosshair of the thirds. The other creative decision you'll see I made was to have him keep his notebook open here. That was inspired partly by the reference image that we saw earlier, but also inspired partly by just wanting it to feel natural, have him feel like he has something at his desk if this is where he works from home. So it was a little bit of bringing that office feel kind of into this living room environment for the interview, making it feel it's a clean frame, but it also has that casualness of like, yeah, there's a book on the table. And here we go. We have our B camera, our tight angle, and I really like the way this turned out. I think a couple neat things are his eye color, these kind of deep green, bluish turquoise eye color that kind of blends nicely with the backdrop of these trees through the window. And I ended up making the decision, unlike the reference frame, I didn't shoot that B camera looking down at him. I thought this presented better, so I ended up going a bit more eye level, a bit more consistent with the framing of that A camera, and I think it turned out really nice. So you'll see that I did end up shooting the interview short-sighted, so I did match that stylistic decision of the B camera, so there is more space behind him than there is in front of him, and I think that matches well with the style of the series that they sent over my way. And here we go, the full behind the scenes of the interview in action, all the gear, all the setup, all the turned inside out living room that I did to get those frames to look like you just saw. So there you have it. One more look, the A cam, the B cam. What do you think? Let me know in the comments, unless you're gonna tear me apart. Don't do that. I'm trying my hardest, everybody. That's a wrap. Well, actually, I gotta haul all that gear down 3 flights of stairs, but good day, good shoot. Hope you all enjoyed that walkthrough of the interview setup. I'll see you next time. Until then, go out and tell some stories.